Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different. Well, we're not doing anything too different. It's still a deep dive. But today, we're diving into the world of eyes and ears.
Interesting.
You've sent us some really fascinating medical texts all about these sensory powerhouses, how they work, and what happens when things go wrong. I've been reading through them, and wow, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, these sources you've sent over are like detailed owner's manuals.
Yeah.
Really fascinating stuff.
Exactly, yeah. It's amazing how much we rely on our sight and hearing every single day. But before we get into all the ways things can go wrong, how about we take a step back first? Expert speaker, can you walk us through the anatomy of a healthy eye and ear, especially the parts mentioned in the source material?
Absolutely. So imagine the eye like a camera. Okay. It's got a lens just like a camera that focuses light. And then at the back, there's this light-sensitive surface called the retina, kind of like the camera's sensor.
I see, so it captures the image.
Right. Now, the cornea, which is that clear front part of your eye, it actually does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to focusing the light before it even reaches the lens.
Wow, so it's really doing the hard work, huh?
Yeah, you could say that. Then the lens fine-tunes the focus for seeing things up close or far away. And this focusing system, this is actually where a lot of common vision problems come in, like, for instance, myopia.
Myopia, that's nearsightedness, right?
Exactly.
So is that when something's off with how the lens focuses?
Well, it can be, but a lot of times it has to do with the shape of the eye itself.
Hmm.
With myopia, the eye might be a little too long or the cornea might be too curved.
Interesting.
And because of that, the light ends up being focused in front of the retina instead of directly on it. So when that happens, distant objects look blurry.
That makes sense. So it really is about the whole system working together, not just one part.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
this is actually why just defining myopia as like seeing close up better doesn't really capture the full picture. The source material actually mentions how myopia is becoming more and more common worldwide.
Oh, really? So more people are becoming nearsighted. Why is that? Is it all the screens we're looking at?
Well, there's a lot of research going on right now looking at that very question. It's complicated, but spending less time outdoors and more time focusing on things close up, like, yeah, screens, that could be playing a role, especially for kids.
Huh. So our digital lives might be affecting our vision. That's kind of alarming. But I guess that's a deep dive for another day. Now, what about ears? I know a lot of people don't realize how vital they are for balance, not just for hearing.
Absolutely. If you think of the eye like a camera, then the ear is more like a microphone and a motion sensor combined, which is really cool if you think about it.
It is. So how does it all work?
Well, first, sound waves. They enter through the outer ear and travel down the ear canal until they hit the eardrum.
Right, makes sense.
Then what happens is the eardrum vibrates. And get this, these vibrations are then amplified by those teeny tiny bones in your middle ear. The malleus and caracus and stapes.
Oh, right. I remember those names, the hammer, anvil, and stirrup.
Exactly. Those names are definitely memorable. And for good reason.
Why is that?
Because they play a crucial role in how we hear. They're the key to taking those sound waves and turning them into signals our brains can actually understand. Eventually, those vibrations reach the inner ear, which is really the star of the show, in my opinion.
Right, the inner ear. That's where things get really interesting. Isn't that where those delicate hair cells are? I remember reading about those in the source material.
You got it. The inner ear houses something called a cochlea, which is this spiral-shaped, fluid-filled structure. And those hair cells, they live inside the cochlea. Think of them like tiny little sensors, each tuned to a specific frequency of sound.
Wow. Okay, so walk me through this. When those tiny bones in the middle ear send their vibrations to the inner ear, then what?
So those vibrations, they cause the fluid in the cochlea to move, which then stimulates these hair cells we've been talking about.
Okay, I'm following.
And when those hair cells are stimulated, they send electrical signals along the auditory nerve straight to the brain. And that's how we hear.
It's incredible, this unbelievably complex process all happening in our ears constantly. But like with any complex system, things can go wrong sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. And our sources dive into a whole bunch of conditions that can affect both eyes and ears.
Yeah, and I feel like eye problems, especially as we get older, those seem super common. I know my vision isn't what it used to be.
Oh, totally. It happens to almost everyone.
Yeah.
Actually, you were talking about your own vision earlier.
Yeah.
Well, the source material, it actually had a good explanation for why our eyes start to, play tricks on us as we age.
Oh, really? Like why I suddenly need reading glasses? Fill me in.
Okay, so remember how we were talking about the lens and how it changes shape to help us focus on things at different distances.
Yeah, like a zoom lens, right.
Exactly. But over time, that lens, it starts to lose some of its elasticity, which, I mean, it makes sense. It's just a natural part of aging.
Makes sense.
But because of that, it gets harder for the eye to adjust its focus, especially for things up close, like when you're reading. That's
Yeah.
actually what presbyopia is.
Ah, presbyopia, that's the fancy word for needing reading glasses, right?
Exactly. It's not that your arms are getting shorter, it's that your lenses aren't as flexible.
Well, that's good to know. So what about some of these other common eye conditions we hear about, like cataracts? What causes those?
Well, let's go back to that camera analogy. If the lens of a camera gets cloudy, the picture's going to be blurry, right?
Right.
It's kind of the same idea with cataracts, that normally clear lens in your eye, it can get clouded with proteins as you get older.
So instead of focusing light, it's scattering it.
Exactly. And that can cause blurry vision, faded colors. Sometimes lights seem too bright or glaring. It really affects how you see things.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds really frustrating. And I'm guessing they don't just go away on their own, do they?
Unfortunately, no. Cataracts usually need surgery, but it's actually a really common procedure. They basically replace the clouded lens with an artificial one.
Wow, modern medicine. That's wild.
Yeah.
Speaking of eye conditions, the source material also mentioned glaucoma. Is that something you can talk about? What makes it so concerning?
Glaucoma is definitely one you don't want to mess around with. It's often called the sneak thief of sight because it can really steal your vision without you even noticing at first.
Really? You don't have any symptoms?
Well, at least not in the early stages. It's all about damage to the optic nerve, which is what carries visual information from your eye to your brain.
Okay, and what causes that damage?
A lot of times, it's linked to pressure inside the eye building up. Doctors call it intraocular pressure.
So if that pressure keeps building, it damages the optic nerve.
Exactly. Imagine like a slow leak in a pipe. Even if it's a tiny leak, if you ignore it for long enough, it can cause serious damage. Glaucoma is kind of like that.
That's a good way to put it. So early detection is key with this one then.
Absolutely. That's why regular eye exams are so important, especially as we age. It's the best way to catch things like glaucoma or any other eye problem, really, early on when treatment is most effective.
Okay, noted. I'm scheduling an eye appointment as soon as we're done here. So we've talked about eyes, but we can't forget about ears.
Of course not. And our sources had some really interesting insights into some common ear problems, too.
Well, I'm all ears. What did you find?
Let's talk about ear infections. Those are incredibly common, especially in kids.
Right, like those middle ear infections, otitis media.
Yes, that's the one. They happen when fluid builds up behind the eardrum in the middle ear, and that causes pain, pressure, sometimes even hearing loss, though usually it's temporary.
Oh, wow. Why does that happen?
Well, remember those tiny bones we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier? The hammer, anvil, and stirrup?
Yeah,
Their job is to amplify those sound vibrations.
right.
Well, when that fluid builds up in the middle ear, it can actually muffle those vibrations, which is what makes it harder to hear.
Wow, so it all comes back to that complex dance between different parts of the ear. It's fascinating, but also kind of makes you realize how delicate the system is.
For sure. And speaking of delicate, let's talk about the inner ear. Because remember, it's not just about hearing. That's where a sense of balance comes from, too.
Oh, right. It's like our built-in gyroscope. What happens when things go wrong there?
Well, our sources actually mentioned labyrinthitis, which is an inner ear infection that can totally throw off your equilibrium.
Labyrinthitis. Okay. Just the name sounds disorienting.
It can be pretty rough, yeah. Often causes vertigo, that spinning sensation, nausea, vomiting. Not fun.
Yeah, that sounds awful. So basically, an ear infection can make you feel like the room is spinning.
Exactly. It shows how connected our senses really are. Something goes wrong in one area, and it can have a ripple effect elsewhere.
Wow, the human body is wild. So, we've been talking about a lot of different conditions, but there are a couple that seem to go together a lot too. Tinnitus and vertigo. Is there a reason for that? So tinnitus and vertigo, they really seem to go hand in hand. What's the connection there?
Yeah, you're right. They often show up together, but not always. It can be a little tricky.
Okay, so let's break it down then. What exactly is tinnitus?
So tinnitus is that experience of hearing a ringing, buzzing, whooshing kind of sound in your ears.
Oh, yeah.
Even when there's actually nothing around you making that sound, that's tinnitus.
Oh, I've totally had that, especially after going to a concert, that ringing that just lingers.
Yep, that's a really common trigger. Being exposed to super loud noises can damage those delicate hair cells we were talking about in the inner ear, and that can lead to tinnitus. But it's not only loud music, even just getting older or certain medications can cause it too.
Wait, medications can cause it? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's called ototoxicity, and it can be a side effect of some medications. Antibiotics are one example, and even high doses of aspirin. They can damage the inner ear and lead to hearing loss, tinnitus, or both.
Wow, I'll definitely be more careful about that. Okay, so that's tinnitus. Now, what about vertigo? That's the feeling of the room spinning, right?
Exactly. It's this really disorienting feeling like everything around you is spinning,
Yeah.
even though you're perfectly still. And a lot of times it comes with nausea, too, which makes it even worse.
I bet. It sounds truly awful, like something out of a movie.
Yeah, and it all comes back to the inner ear. Remember how we were saying it's not just about hearing, it's also about balance and spatial orientation?
Right, our built-in gyroscope.
Exactly. So if something messes with that system, it can completely throw off your balance.
Makes sense. So is there one condition that often involves both of these symptoms, tinnitus and vertigo?
There is. It's called Meniere's disease. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've definitely heard the name, but I'm a little fuzzy on what it actually is.
Well, it's basically a disorder of the inner ear, and it's thought to be caused by a buildup of fluid in this part of the inner ear called the labyrinth.
Okay.
And what happens is this fluid buildup, it messes with the normal functioning of those hair cells, and that can trigger these episodes of vertigo, tinnitus, and sometimes even hearing loss.
So it's like a plumbing problem, but in your ear.
That's a good way to think about it. And just like you'd want to fix a plumbing problem, Meniere's disease needs attention too. There's no cure, unfortunately, but there are treatments that can help manage the symptoms.
It's incredible how much is going on in our ears that we just never even think about. It really makes you realize how important it is to take care of them.
I totally agree. And there's so much more we could talk about, from earwax buildup to those more serious conditions we've touched on today.
Yeah.
But being proactive about your ear health is key.
Absolutely. Regular checkups, protecting your ears from loud noises, being mindful of what medications you're taking, it all makes a difference.
It really does. Knowledge is power, and understanding how amazing these sensory organs are is the first step to taking good care of them.
Well said. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the world of eyes and ears. We've explored how they work, what can go wrong, and most importantly, how to keep them healthy.
It's been fun.
It has. And listeners, we'll leave you with this. We've talked about how things like aging, genetics, even our environment can affect our senses. But what about the mind-body connection? Could things like stress actually have an impact on our vision or hearing? It's something to think about. Until next time, stay curious.